everyone! In today's video, we're crafting with napkins to create beautiful custom pieces. Decoupage is a simple and easy way to add a personal touch to your projects. Hi, my name is Katie from Lady Red Crafting. Grab some napkins and let's get crafting. I just love these palettes from the Dollar Tree, and for this project, we're going to take 2 of these palettes and attach them together. To do this, I'm going to flip them over onto the back side. And using some wood glue, I'm going to go ahead and just put a little bit of this glue and smush these 2 palettes together. And next, I'm going to grab my staple gun and just add a few staples to try to help put this together. And after I did that, I didn't feel like this was sturdy enough. So what I did was I took a popsicle stick and I'm just going to glue that in the center there to brace everything. But I'm only going to use a short piece so that way you can't see it through the palette. To attach this, I'm just using a little bit of wood glue and hot glue. After about 2 hours, this was totally ready for me to start working on. So we're going to go ahead and put this onto a paintable surface, and I grab my Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to dry brush this paint onto my palette, but I didn't want it to be very thick on the palette. So what I wanted to do here is I took a little spray bottle of some water and I just spritzed the palette down and a little bit on where the paint was. And this helped just thin the paint out a little bit, so it's more like a stain and less like a paint. While we have the paint out, I'm going to go ahead and give a little coat of paint on these pine cone flowers that I made. And these are really easy to make. I just used some outdoor clippers with some pine cones that I had left over from Christmas. And if you want to see a more detailed description on how to make these, I do have a video that I'm going to link up here where I show how I make the pine cones from start to finish. So while everything is drying, I am going to prep my napkin. And I found this beautiful napkin at Home Goods, and I just love their selection on napkins. To prep this napkin, all I'm doing is removing the bottom 2 layers. So I use a little piece of painter's tape, and that helps assist me pull apart the layers from the napkin. Now let's go back to our palette board. I'm going to use some Mod Podge, and I'm just doing a nice layer of Mod Podge over the top of these wood pieces. Once that is completely dry, then we're going to apply the napkin. So with this napkin, I'm positioning it in the center of the napkin because of the borders on it. So we're just going to see the left and the right border. We won't see the top and the bottom border on our palette. After that, I grab a piece of parchment paper and I place that over the top of our napkin, and using my hot iron, I'm just going to iron that down, which will reactivate the Mod Podge and allow that napkin to stick nicely to those wood pieces. Next, we're going to take the Mod Podge and we're going to paint that Mod Podge over the top of just the wood pieces on the board. What this is going to allow us to do is just kind of seal that napkin in prior to us sanding, so none of that accidentally sands off while we're sanding between the slats. This is when you need to pack your patience and just let that sit and dry. And once that is completely dry, and this did take a few hours, I then went back in with my zip sander, and I'm just going to sand in a downward motion all the way around the exterior of this board. Next, what I like about this zip sander is it's so small, it fits really nice inside the different slats in between. So you can just sand in between, and then I just take a little brush, a paintbrush, and I just dust off any extra napkin. And if you don't have a zip sander, don't worry, a piece of sanding paper will work as well. Otherwise, you can also use like a nail file or an emery board. That also will get in between those slats really nicely. So now for our final touches. I'm going to use this ribbon, and this ribbon I did get at Walmart. They have it usually all year round, but they definitely have it out during the fall season as well. What I like when they get them out at the fall season is that if they don't sell out, they do go on clearance right after fall before Christmas. So I usually pick up a few rolls of it then because I love this ribbon. And I'm just going to cut it to size and hot glue it to the back side of this piece just to make sure it sits nicely in the center of our piece. We're not going to stop there. I have this Simplicity ribbon as well, and this also came from Walmart. It does not have any wire in it at all. I think it's more of a trim piece, but I love this ribbon. And I'm just going to cut a small piece and put that in the center of our board and on top of that other ribbon. I found that the hot glue on the back side of the board was just enough to keep these ribbons in place, so I thought that was great. So now let's flip our board over, and I'm going to grab those pine cone flowers that we made earlier. And I'm just going to position the first one in the center of this board. And I had to use quite a bit of hot glue because it's a little bit of an uneven surface. And I go back and I add a little bit more hot glue. But once I got that glue down really well with the hot glue, it stayed perfectly. Now this next step is optional. I kept going back and forth on whether I wanted just the one pine cone flower or if I wanted to go with the 3 pine cone flowers. And eventually I just decided that I really like how one pine cone looked. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below if you would have done 1 flower or 3 flowers. And now here's our final decor piece. I love how this turns out. It's neutral but fun with that little bit of green in there. So I found this adorable box at the Dollar Tree, and I just love the design on this box. And this is one of their new pieces in their Crafter Square section. And the first thing that I noticed about this box was how tight the lid fit. And I wanted to loosen that up just a little bit so this will be easier for us to add hinges to. So what I'm doing here is I'm using my zip sander, and I'm using 80 grit sandpaper on this, and I'm just sanding the inside of the box. So that way it'll be easier for us to put the lid on and off. Next, I'm going to take some of my Apple Barrel white paint, and I'm going to put that in a little bowl. And I'm going to add just a little bit of water to this. What I'm trying to do is just thin that paint out just a little bit. So when I put this onto my box, it goes on more like a stain and less like a coat of paint. So I'm just going to completely coat my box here. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the exact same thing on the lid. So now let's go ahead and prep our napkin. This napkin is from HomeGoods, and I've used it before, and I just love that it's neutral. It has that gray and white tone to it. And I'm taking a piece of painter's tape, and I'm just going to use that to remove both of these layers from the napkin, because we just want that top layer. And here's a little sneak peek of how this is going to look on our box. I'm just going to lay that on there, and you'll see with that white, it just brings everything out in that napkin. Next, I'm going to take a little bit of water and a paintbrush, and we're going to use this method to go ahead and just rip some pieces out of our napkin. And there's really no rhyme or reason to this. I just don't really want any straight edges when I'm putting this onto my box. And because we're not going to coat it completely, it's going to look like tattered or torn a little bit, like it's just kind of faded with this print on the box. So this is how we're going to do it, just random pieces just tore apart. Let's take our Mod Podge, and I'm using the matte finish Mod Podge, but you can use the glossy if that's more to your liking. And I am just going to paint a little bit of this Mod Podge onto the box. And I'm just doing one quadrant at a time. And I'm doing the whole entire thing just because I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to place this piece of napkin on here. And once I've decided where I want that napkin, I'm taking a piece of cling wrap and I'm just going to smooth out the napkin to get any wrinkles off. And we're just going to keep repeating this step until we get all of the quadrants of the box completely filled to your liking. So whatever you feel looks better to you. So while we're continuing to decoupage our box, I want to tell you about this exciting playlist I'm a part of, Recreation Inspiration. And I'm hosting it this month with Loli D Creations and guest host DIY with Aria. This playlist is all about recreating inspirations. My inspiration this month is one of my favorites, Brandy from the DIY Struggle. Brandy is an incredibly talented DIY creator. She is one of my personal favorites to watch for decoupage videos. All of these creations today were inspired by the video linked in my description box. So please be sure to check out her channel for some amazing ideas and crafty tips. And for more crafty fun, please check out the playlist. Thank you! And now that our box is complete, I'm going to set this aside to dry. And let's grab our lid and let's start doing some decoupage on the lid. Just going to do a light coat of our Mod Podge on one quadrant of the lid. And once we get that complete, we're just going to lay down that napkin over the top and pat down using a piece of cling wrap to make sure everything is secure. I'm going to continue to do this across the whole entire lid, just putting little pieces of the napkin onto the box. Don't worry about us covering the decorative holes. We're going to go ahead and take care of that in a little bit. So for now, just get the placement of the napkins where you would like them. Set that aside to dry and grab our base of our box. And I'm taking the Mod Podge again, and I'll just do a quick sealing coat and let that dry. Now back to the lid. But for the lid, before we move forward, I'm going to take a small razor blade and I'm just going to go ahead and cut out any of the paper so that we can see that beautiful design. Now, once we have all of that paper removed, I am taking a fine tipped brush with my Mod Podge and I'm just going to go ahead and seal my Mod Podge in on the lid. And using that fine tip brush, I'm able to get in between all of the layers. So that way, if there were any leftover pieces of napkin, it would just paint them down into the box, making them look like they're part of the box. Once everything is completely dry, I grabbed out these little hinges that I found at Lowe's. These were the smallest set of hinges that I could find there. And when I got them, the screws on them were still a little bit too long. I ended up having to go to a different hardware store to get shorter screws, and all they had left were 4. So I am only going to be putting one hinge onto this little jewelry box, which should be just fine. It's a very small box, but I would have liked to have put 2 hinges. Once I have my hinge in place, I am taking a little piece of painter's tape, and I'm just going to tape down the hinge on both sides. I'm going to take one of the screws and I'm just going to poke that into the hole on the hinge, and I'm just going to screw that down about halfway, and then I'm going to continue to do that on all 4 screws. Next, I'm just going to ensure that the hinge is working properly, and now I'm going to remove that painter's tape really carefully. And once that painter's tape is completely removed, go ahead and screw those screws all the way in to really secure that hinge. Now that everything is in place, some finishing touches. I'm just going back to using that white apple bear paint with a tiny bit of water added, and I'm just going to take that and just lightly brush around different areas of the box, just slightly blending everything in. I'm not really going over the whole entire thing, just lightly brushing where I think it needs it. If you get too much in one spot, I just take a little baby wipe and wipe it clean. Now, once that paint has completely dried, I grab my Sugar Metallic Space Gray, and I'm just going to put a little bit on my brush, not very much. It's very, very dry. And I'm just going to lightly dry brush around the whole entire box. And I'm saying really dry, very, very little. What I like about this paint, it has a slight sparkle to it, and I like that. It just kind of blends everything in and it gives everything like a finishing touch to the box. Now here is what our box looks like. We could leave it like this, but I wanted to add one little thing. This is just a thumbtack from the Dollar Tree that I'm cutting the top off because I like the little pearl on the top. And I'm taking some hot glue and I'm just going to hot glue that right to the center in the hole on the top of the box. And that is my final little piece for this box. This is ready for me to display on my dresser with some bracelets in it. I am very happy with how this turned out. You would never know that you bought this from the Dollar Tree and transformed it. And if you're enjoying this content and want to see more, please hit that subscribe button below. It really helps my channel grow. Thank you. Who doesn't love a great cutting board project? This is a mini cutting board that would be great for a shelf sitter or for a tiered tray. Let's start out by putting this on a paintable surface, and I'm using some painter's tape just to tape that down so it doesn't move. I was out of my mineral colored Waverly chalk paint, so I needed to mix up a little bit of something that would kind of go with the napkin I'm using. So I'm using light mocha and white from Apple Barrel, and I'm just going to mix that paint together till I get the color that I want. I'm only going to paint the front face of this cutting board. I'm going to save the back side for another project later on, so that's why I like to do this. You can see that I got a little impatient here, and I decided to grab out my heat tool and just dry that real quickly. Now let's go ahead and prep this beautiful napkin. I got this napkin at HomeGoods. It's a Martha Stewart napkin, and I really love this napkin. I've used it for different projects already, but this time what I want to use is the background of this napkin. At first, we have to prep our napkin, so I'm just removing the back 2 layers of the napkin, and I use a little piece of painter's tape, but Scotch tape works just as well, and that helps me remove those back 2 layers. As you can see here, this is one of those tough napkins that second layer just did not want to come off. It eventually did. It just took a lot of patience to do this. But once you do, it is well worth it. I love this napkin. We're going to use that water method again here, and I'm just going to trace around the outside of this butterfly, and I'm going to make as big of pieces that I can make with this napkin, just giving it a torn edge look. And it doesn't matter what shape they end up being in, because we will tear them into pieces that we can use onto our cutting board. And now that we have our pieces, I'm going to get my cutting board, and I'm going to just kind of play around with positioning where I want to put these napkins. And after I do that, I realize, oh no, I need to put my Mod Podge on. We'll just take those off, and then I grab my Mod Podge and do a nice light coat of Mod Podge on the top. And while the Mod Podge is still wet, I am going to place these pieces of napkins on top of our cutting board. To smooth everything out, I did use a piece of cling wrap and my little Mod Podge roller. Then I continue adding some Mod Podge and some more napkin and using that cling wrap until I'm satisfied with how the front of the cutting board looks. After this has completely dried, yes, I know that there's edges, but we're going to get those later. We are going to do a sealing coat over the top of this Mod Podge first, just so when we do our sanding to get rid of those extra edges, napkin then won't peel off of the cutting board. Now, 2 or 3 hours later, once this has completely dried, I grabbed my zip sander and I started sanding in a downward motion just to remove any extra napkin. Now, if you don't have a zip sander, that's totally fine. Use a sanding block, a piece of sandpaper. You can even use an emery board. And if you're desperate, you can use a razor blade. Just don't cut yourself. We have our beautiful canvas. I am grabbing one of these stencils, and this stencil is from Folk Art. And I'll leave a link for this stencil in my description box below. But it's a self-adhesive stencil. It is not a silkscreen, so it is a little bit different. It doesn't have that grid that a silkscreen would have. And what I've found with me with stenciling, I am not always the best stenciler, so I do like using the chalk paste when I am stenciling. And I am using a redesigned chalk paste cranberry, but it wasn't quite the color that I wanted to match the napkin. So I added a little bit of my Waverly chalk paint to my chalk paste so that I could make a slightly different color red. Just position our stencil onto the cutting board. And I also went and grabbed my Kingdom Moss chalk paste. So that way I can do both of these colors at the same time when I'm stenciling. And so I'm just using a little squeegee to do the flower first, and then I will do the green for the stem, and then we'll pull that stencil off. So I'll let you watch what I'm doing. One of the things that I really like about this stencil is that all of the pieces are kind of separated, so you can just position them differently onto your piece. I think that's really helpful when you're doing stenciling. So on this one here, I am putting on the words "Let Love Grow," but I'm going to have to position them just a little bit different since we're using a mini cutting board here. And I'm going to use my chalk paste in the color Iron Gate, and that was by Redesign. And I'll put links for all of these pastes in my description box below if you'd like, but I get them on Amazon. It's really easy to get. I do want to distress this a little bit, and to do that for this project, I am using my Waverly Antique Wax. And I'm just placing a little bit of that on a baby wipe, and I'm just going to lightly rub that around the edges of my cutting board and anywhere in between that I feel like it needs it. Now, once everything is completely dry, I did find these fun stamps at the Dollar Tree, and I'm going to use the butterfly for this project. And as you can see here, I have a really old stamp pad from Stampin' Up, and I thought, you know what, this might still work. It's been 20 years, but who knows? And it definitely is not working the way I wanted it. I did not have any other ink pads. So if you have any recommendations on a really good brand for ink, I need to invest in some new ones. So please send me a link or drop me a message down below and let me know what you guys think is a good ink pad. So to finish this project, I decided, well, they're Dollar Tree stamps. I'm going to try using some Waverly chalk paint. And so I just used some black chalk paint, and I used that to stamp my little butterflies on. And actually, the stamp cleaned up really nicely, so I should be able to reuse it. So the paint did not ruin it, so that was nice to know. Now I grabbed some jute twine, and I just wrapped that around the top of my cutting board and hot glued that into place. And once I was done with that, I thought, well, it needs a tiny bit more, so let's go ahead and add a little bit more hot glue and a cute jute bow. And now our mini cutting board is complete. This turns out amazing. It is a great transition piece, something that you can use in the summer or go right into the fall. And there you have it. 3 beautiful decoupage projects. I hope you enjoyed these crafts as much as I did. And if you're looking for more fun and decoupage ideas, be sure to check out this video. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, craft more, stress less.